This is Demetrius Binrad.
And this is Isaac Meyer.
And you're listening to Criminal Records Podcast, a show about some of the weirdest cases in true crime history. And today I'm really feeling like I would love to hear a story about people making some good legal decisions. Have you got one of those for me?
Very much depending on your definition of good. Hello, everyone. We are here back with some of the messiest people I've ever seen in my research for this show. And those of you who are listening for a while, no, that is really a statement.
That is a high bar to clear for a show that's already done the concept of Florida Man and multiple people who attempted to commit political assassinations due to lead poisoning.
We are about to go down a rabbit hole of right-wing conspiratorial Looney Tunes-ness that will, lead to some depressing places. But also just, speaking of lead poisoning,
I'm firing up my Truth Social account right now. I'm typing up how children need their daily dose of lead, and I'm sure that I'm going to get some great advice from whatever I'm about to hear. Definitely take legal advice from this podcast.
Definitely don't take this as legal advice, because the Reichsbürger movement, which is the subject for today's episode, is in a little bit of legal hot water just because they tried to do one coup. And here in the United States, we're okay with that sort of thing, apparently. But in Germany, that's a step too far.
Oh boy. Okay. So there are a lot of things, there are a lot of governments one could throughout German history have attempted to do a coup against. So which government are we actually talking about here?
We are talking about a movement that claims that the current government of Germany is not legitimate or a real government. They very much have a lot in common with the Taiwan civil government, previous episode subject, and also with probable future episode subject, the QAnon movement, the 3%ers, all those fun people. Also, apparently they've started getting into QAnon, or a few of them have. Anyway, this is going to be quite something, so strap in, folks. But first, of course, we do have to start with some historical background in German history, because if the current German government is not legitimate, the question then becomes, okay, which one is?
There are some bad answers to this one.
Oh yeah, there are
some. On the edge of my seat.
There are some bad ones. So first, of course, we must begin in 1806 with the end of the Holy Roman Empire, and we must make the mandatory joke from Voltaire that it was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. But also, it doesn't matter because in 1806 it stops existing, mostly because the last Holy Roman Emperor, Francis II, is worried that he's about to get his shit pushed in by Napoleon, and that old Frenchie's just going to grab the crown from him after that point. So Germany, the states of Germany break up into various principalities after that point. In 1871, they are reunified under the rule of Prussia, one of the kingdoms of Germany, led by Wilhelm I of the Hohenzollern dynasty, a name that gets harder to say every time I do it. And this is what we call the German Empire. So after the reunification, we have the German Empire, led by these kings, which will last from 1871 until 1918. This is the period of what is called the Second Reich sometimes, the First Reich being the Holy Roman Empire. The German Emperor during this period rules from his imperial capital, the city of Berlin. There are 25 different states of the empire. If you're curious, 4 kingdoms, 6 grand duchies, 6 regular flavor duchies, 7 principalities, 3 free cities, and 1 imperial territory. Prussia's the most important, but they all exist.
Isn't that also the one where each one of those has its own various mishmash criminal codes, too?
They have slightly different laws. They also have their own aristocracies. So, like, each of those different, all the duchies have a duke. The kingdoms have a king. The 3 free cities are republics, so they do have elected governments, but they still kind of operate like aristocracies. And they also get to appoint the members of the German Senate, essentially, what's called the Bundesrat. And so they appoint their own people, usually their hereditary monarchs or relatives or whatever. There is an elected lower house, the Reichstag, but the upper house, the Bundesrat, has veto power. And also, there's no elected, president. The monarch, the emperor of Germany, is just the head of state and kind of also the head of government. There is a prime minister, but the monarch has a lot of power. They also appoint the Reich Chancellor, who is essentially the prime minister. So functionally, this is kind of a federal constitutional monarchy, but practically, there's not that many limits on the power of the emperor. But that's okay because it's not going to last very long, Imperial Germany. Because, we have a little World War, a little World War One, a little first go round. And that does end the German monarchy pretty badly. Wilhelm II, who's the emperor at that point, is more famous for his love of speedboating than he is his love of actually running the country. And so doesn't do a particularly good job and ends up having to flee in advance of a coup that aims to overthrow him. And I think lives in the Netherlands for the rest of his life, just kind of vaguely shaking his fist in the direction of Germany.
You know what? If you love speedboating, great place to choose.
That is probably true. And I don't know this, but I assume he did get some good speedboating in at that point. So maybe he should have just enjoyed the experience.
You know what? As things that happened to German heads of state went in that century, could have been worse.
Could have been worse. So there's a new government when the empire collapses, and this is what we call the Weimar Republic, named after Weimar in central Germany, where it kind of gets its first organization going because early on in its history, the government can't relocate to Berlin. Berlin is in the middle of a giant battle between leftist Spartacists and right-wing militias called Freikorps, which I think I'm pronouncing correctly. So it's not like a super chill place to hang out. So instead, they just in Weimar chillin'.
Excuse me, back that up. The Spartacists?
Oh yeah, it was we'll probably do a whole thing on the Spartacist uprising, or I'll do it. I'll make you listen to a whole thing on the Spartacist uprising at some point, probably.
I really hope they literally did go around pretending each one of them was Spartacus.
Not to my knowledge, tragically. Also, that's probably going to be one of the ones where I get yelled at a lot because it means talking a lot about leftists. And I'll say something that will anger some internet leftists, and then we'll get a lot of very upset emails from them. But that's okay. That's in tradition of the show. And today, today's not about that. Today's about something much weirder. So, the Weimar Republic, as we all know, just a really well-run government, super great, real positive political reputation. No, I'm just kidding. It has a very loaded history. It has this reputation as this decadent, corrupt, failed state racked by its own internal weaknesses, by its cultural debauchery. That's not entirely fair, in my opinion. A lot of that is, frankly, propaganda from the government that will come next about why the Weimar Republic had to go.
And let me state for the record, some of that cultural debauchery sounded like it was a really fun party.
Some of that cultural debauchery was just people being very gay, which, yeah, just having fun. Don't be a dick about it. So yeah, the Weimar Republic is this period also is of artistic and cultural flourishing in Germany. It's this period where crazy things like women being allowed to vote happens. Germany did that before the US, actually, by the way. In 1919 instead of 1920, where free speech is liberalized in a way it had not been under the German Empire. It's true the government is a little messy, but a lot of that has to do with active sabotage by conservative politicians who are more worried about socialists than they are this newfangled Nazi party that they seem to not really have as much of an issue with. So basically what I'm saying is fuck Paul Hindenburg. And yeah. That's my hot take on the Weimar Republic. Better than it gets credit for being.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you and I run in very different history appreciator circles, because I find that my history appreciator circles seem to be so positive on the Weimar Republic that they don't always acknowledge some of the government issues that were happening at the time and causing some very bad issues with people's actual quality of life, whereas I feel like your historian circles seem to be very down on them and not giving them credit for some of the social progress.
Yeah, I find a lot of maybe this is just coming from political history, a lot of the focus is sort of on the political problems of the Weimar system. I have to say, see most of that as an issue with the conservative side of the Weimar system. Which doesn't really change much about how the empire worked, except more rights for citizens, and you replace the monarch with an elected Reichspresident, and then you elect Paul Hindenburg, who sucks. And so, that just kind of sucks.
When has the name Hindenburg ever been associated with a disaster, Isaac?
That's one of my favorite history jokes. I guess this too will go down in flames.
All right, so I think we know what's coming next.
Yes, of course, we've covered Reich number 1 and Reich number 2, so now we are at Reich number 3, when the conservatives of Germany decide in January 1933, hey, we can't form a majority government, but you know who we could form a government with is this Hitler guy. He seems above board, and we can totally keep him under control. And we don't need to spend much time on this one, I think. We all know how this goes.
You know what? I think I am aware that Hitler made a few little whoopsies.
Yeah, I'd describe it that way. So we're just going to flash forward to 1945 because I don't want to be bummed out by talking about the Holocaust right now. So Hitler was bad. This is the stance of the Criminal Records podcast. I think that's all we need to cover.
Real bold political stance. Really going out on a limb on that one.
Yeah, I know. How could I say something so controversial and yet so brave?
And something I feel like a lot of pop history doesn't quite dwell on as much as it could. It was pretty bad to be a German under some of Hitler's policies, too. He made some just flat out very dumb mistakes politically.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to, it was definitely worse for some people than others, but I don't think Hitler was good for Germany in any circumstance. You do not, as it turns out, under any circumstance, have to hand it to him. So, what to do with Germany after World War II? It's 1945. Germany's been defeated. Hitler has killed himself. The one good thing Hitler did do was kill himself. And so now, what are the Allies going to do with Germany? They had demanded unconditional surrender from Germany to make it unambiguous who had won the war, unlike World War I. And with the goal of reconstructing German society to make it more democratic. But what does that mean in practice? What does Joseph Stalin think about reconstructing Germany to make it more democratic?
How could you possibly reconstruct a war-torn country better than to build a great big wall down it?
They didn't do that till the 60s. Before that, it was all machine guns. So eventually the Allies agree to split Germany into 4 different zones to take their marbles and go home. And so you get Germany split into 4 occupation zones, starting with the Northwest and going clockwise. They are British, Soviet, American, and French. They do more or less the same thing with Berlin, though I believe the British and American ones get flipped in terms of cardinal directions. And then there's going to be an overall Allied Control Council whose job it is to work together and coordinate across the occupation zones until they can, of course, come to a calm, gentlemanly, thoughtful agreement about a reconstructed Germany, which of course goes really great, and that's why the Soviet Union ends up withdrawing from the Allied Control Council and instead saying we're just going to make our own Germany with blackjack and hookers, which is where you get the Soviet-dominated German Democratic Republic, also known as East Germany. The other allies, Britain, France, and the US, just mush their Germanys together to create the German Federal Republic, or West Germany. And so now we have 2 Germanys, one communist flavor and one freedom flavor. West Germany is the one that matters more for us for this topic, because, spoilers, that's the one that wins. And it develops a basic law which will serve functionally as its constitution, which comes into force in 1949. And here's the important thing for us. This time there's no half-assed rewrite of the Imperial Constitution. Just throw it all in the garbage. We're starting fresh. It is rewritten from the ground up, and the West German Constitution is way more liberal than what came before, and I would argue one of the most liberal constitutions in the world today. The preamble states the Constitution is, quote, inspired by the determination to promote world peace as an equal partner in a united Europe. Article 1, the very first part of the Constitution, says, quote, human dignity shall be inviolable. To respect and protect it shall be the duty of all state authority. It is super liberal. There's even a provision in there that you can legally try and overthrow the government if it starts attacking human dignity, which is wild.
Wow. And okay, so it's my understanding that this is one of the constitutions that is actually put into practice more or less as it is written into law. Not 100%. There's definitely been some issues since then with human rights in Germany, especially when it comes to immigrants. But overall, they're hewing much closer to their constitutional duty towards human dignity than some others that have that sort of written in somewhere, but not really followed.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say Germany is a perfect society. I don't think there is such a thing. But certainly I have some constitution envy as an American. And I mean, part of it is just that very intense commitment to transparency and human rights, which is pretty awesome to see. So the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, is obviously the one that does a little bit better long term. 1989, Cold War comes to an end. 1990, East Germany, which is falling apart as its citizens desert it en masse, is peacefully reintegrated into the German Federal Republic, and now there is just one Germany. All is well. Peace has come, except if you are part of the wackadoodle conspiracy movement known as the Reichsbürgers.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Okay, so I've noticed that you started your history of Germany 10 minutes ago very far back. So I am very excited to see why you needed to exposit that particular bit of detail.
Okay, so here's the deal with the Reichsbürgers. And by what that literally means is Reich citizen. Reich, like, as in one of the three Reichs, and then Bürger just means citizen. They are a conspiracy group. They're not very unified. I'd say there's more of a like Reichsbürger umbrella and several different groups under it. Broadly, they're very similar to the Taiwan civil government. They also, like Taiwan, have this complicated chain of different governments transferring sovereignty around. And broadly, what the Reichsbürgers believe is that somewhere in this kind of transfer of sovereignty, there's a break in the chain of legitimacy. They don't all agree on where exactly that is, but they do all agree that for that reason, the current German government, the German Federal Republic, is not legitimate. And therefore, they are not citizens of the German Federal Republic, which is not a real government in their eyes. They are citizens of one of the various German Reichs or Reichsbürgers. Right, that's where the name comes from.
So you get kind of a pick your poison. Do you want to be a citizen of the empire? Do you want to be a citizen of something else?
Yeah, and that's an important thing to note here. These guys are always conservatives. There's nobody who's arguing, I am a Reichsbürger of East Germany that I have seen, right? They're usually monarchists or right-wing revanchists who want to reclaim the parts of Germany that are not in Germany anymore, or just like flat-out Nazis. There are Nazis who survive the post-war purges in Germany. There's even like I didn't know this before researching this podcast, a right-wing socialist Reich party after World War II that is like basically just the Nazi party. But they actually get banned in 1952 because the German constitution allows for the banning of openly anti-democratic parties. So, I honestly think that's pretty great. Like, I know that's somewhat problematic to ban political parties, but like, if your party actively calls for the destruction of democracy, I don't know, fuck you. I stand by that. There are other right-wing parties that still exist or have existed in the post-war period, like the German Reich Party, or today things like Alternative for Deutschland, or Alternative for Germany, AfD. That want to, in some way or another, restore some aspect of the old German Reich or go back to ethnic homogeneity or some other like extreme dog whistle for right-wing proto-Nazism. But none of those groups deny that the current government exists, which is what separates them from the Reichsbürgers. They do lay the groundwork for it, and I would say those right-wing parties, those extreme parties, are related to the Reichsbürger movement, but they are not the same thing. They're kind of pulling from the same starting point and ending in different places. So, from what I can find, the Reichsbürger movement specifically has its roots in the 70s, when there is an upswelling in West Germany of conservative sentiment, a lot like what happens in the US in the 70s, where there's this reaction against the 60s counterculture. You have Nixon and the silent majority. You see something pretty similar in Germany. It usually is attributed to a lawyer and a jurist by the name of Manfred Roeder, who was born in Germany in 1929. He was a part of the Hitler Youth because he was a youth at the time of the Third Reich, and actually fought in the Battle of Berlin when the Nazis got real desperate and started drafting kids, as depicted in the documentary Jojo Rabbit. I'm glad you laughed at that.
Speaking of movies that I really want to get your thoughts on air, not on this podcast, but I am going to sit you down sometime and ask you some questions about Jojo Rabbit.
And that's how Isaac got canceled. Um, so, after World War II, Roeder briefly joins the center-right party, the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, which is like a legitimate mainstream party, but then he gets sucked into the orbit of the extreme German right wing. Also, apparently, had friends and contacts in the Civil Rights era revised Ku Klux Klan in the United States. So just a man who really knows how to pick his friends, I guess.
Wow, just like around the world, just 100% bad idea after bad idea. He's like hitting just full bingo card.
Yeah, he's a real dick. He would claim that he later did not have a connection to post-war ultra-right parties in Germany, but he also was a huge fan of probable future episode subject Rudolf Hess, who in the 1970s is still in Spandau prison in West Berlin for being Adolf Hitler's deputy and right-hand man, and would remain there until his death in 1989. Roeder was briefly Hess's lawyer, or part of his legal team, I should say, not his like primary lawyer. But so yeah, I don't know if this guy sucks. He picks shitty friends, is what I'm getting at here.
Is the Reich that he is nostalgic for the Third Reich is my question, because it seems like the Third Reich.
It's definitely the Third Reich. So he first comes to police attention because he starts doing things like vandalizing magazine kiosks for selling what he calls pornography. I couldn't find what this actually was. It was just like pictures of women in swimsuits or like actual porn, which it is Europe.
Wait. Okay. So this esteemed lawyer is going out in the middle of the night, I assume, and just drawing things on magazine kiosks?
Him and his buddies are like vandalizing them and like ripping stuff down. He does also have some time to give speeches at NPD rallies, the party he's definitely not a member of, which is part of the shitty extreme right, where he talks about how it's bad that German women are having sex with non-German guest workers. So just a real piece of crap. And during all of this, he starts increasingly promoting the theory that the current German government is not legitimate, and that in fact, legally, the Nazi German government still operates. So he is the first Reichsbürger, and he is Third Reich flavored.
I would love to hear his legal justification for this one, because it sure seems to me like the Nazi government does not legally operate in any way whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, it's very iffy. From what I could tell, the theory is just Germany's not really an independent government. It's just an appendage of the Allies, and especially the US, and therefore it's not a sovereign government in the traditional sense of the term, which is not how anything works as I understand it. But, I mean, I guess I'm not a creepy Nazi, so, you know...
So his conspiracy theory is, I've decided that this is a puppet state, and I don't answer to the puppet state. I only answer to the Nazis.
Yes.
Who aren't around anymore to give any orders, which is mighty convenient.
Funny you should say that.
Uh-oh.
So this is when Roeder hops over, I was going to say to send an email, but it's the 70s. He sends a regular mail to a guy named Admiral Karl Donitz, who he thinks is the actual president of Germany. So, Karl Donitz was a Grand Admiral of the German Navy. He was the guy picked by Hitler to run Germany after Hitler kills himself and then Joseph Goebbels kills himself. Hitler's like, Donitz should run the country. So, Admiral Donitz is the one who authorizes the surrender of Germany to the Allies. After that, he's put in prison. At Nuremberg, he is sentenced to 10 years in Spandau prison, hanging out next to Rudolf Hess. And at this point, by the 70s, he's moved to a small town in northern Germany, which I'm going to butcher the name of. Aumehule? I'm very sorry to all German people. Anyway, that's the first time a Jew's ever said that, by the way.
I'm just adding one to the tally of languages we butchered on this podcast. Just wait till I do another episode where I have to pronounce Dutch. Everyone hates that.
Anyway... So Donitz is hanging out in this unpronounceable town in northern Germany. He does not denounce the Nazis or repent for being a big anti-Semite. He said some gnarly shit about Jews during the war that I don't want to put on this podcast. He also claims he didn't know anything about the Holocaust while it was happening, which, fuck you, buddy. So, Manfred Roeder writes this guy a letter and is like, "You're still the president of Germany because the current government doesn't exist." And Donitz astonishingly does not write back. I assume because he's afraid of going back to prison if he does. And so Manfred Roeder says, "Okay, I know what this means. Karl Donitz has abdicated as Reich president, so the position is vacant." So on May 23rd, 1975, he calls together a bunch of his right-wing Looney Tune friends in a city called Flensburg, and they have an election where they astonishingly elect him as Reich administrator, because he can't be Reich chancellor, right? The government apparatus to appoint him doesn't exist. He's the interim Reich administrator. So, he's a real weirdo. His influence is always kind of limited because of his criminal history. He gets involved in right-wing terrorist groups, and in 1980, he's convicted of incitement to murder when two of his co-conspirators kill two Vietnamese migrants in Germany. Supposedly, Roeder has dinner with them afterwards to celebrate the killings. And so he'll spend 10 years in prison as a result of this. In the 90s, he's released, but remains active in the shit heap side of German politics and racks up a bunch of prison sentences, fines. I genuinely had a hard time tracking them because there were so many. And then finally, he has the good sense. He does us all a favor and he dies in 2014.
So right now what I'm seeing is a bunch of people cosplaying that they are members of a government and just sort of forming a secret "we're the real government" club. But I haven't seen any attempts to wield any governmental power yet.
We'll get there at the end. Mostly I want to just make fun of how weird these people are. So Manfred Roeder does not get very far because he is a racist piece of shit right-wing Looney Tune. He eventually kind of gets pushed over to the side in terms of popularity and displaced by someone who is possibly crazier, but also crazy in a way that is less actively offensive, who is kind of more associated with popularizing the Reichsbürger movement, whose name is Wolfgang Abel. Wolfgang Gerhard Gunther Abel is born in 1939, and he's a citizen of East Germany, of East Berlin, right? But he works for something called the Deutsche Reichsbahn, which is a state-run company in East Germany, but because of the weird treaties at the end of World War II, it also runs the S-Bahn, the subway system, in West Germany. So he's an employee of the East German government, but he runs the subway system he helps run the subway system in West Berlin too.
So how does working for the East German government make him feel about his loyalty to his both country and employer?
Well, things get kind of complicated for him because in September 1980, he joins a series of strikes by East Berlin residents who are working in West Berlin on the S-Bahn against wage cuts and route closures, which was actually a pretty big story when it happened. I found a bunch of coverage of it from the time. There was worry that it was going to upset relationships between the two Germanys. Obviously ended up not mattering that much in the long term, but interesting at the time. For us, what matters is that Abel loses his job for participating in the strikes and then tries to sue the West German government. That does not succeed. His lawsuit's thrown out. Now, what he claims happens is that during the lawsuits, he is contacted by emissaries from the post-war allies, from France, the UK, and the United States. Who tell him during the railway strike that because of all this complicated legal wrangling, the reason the strike is so complicated is because the German Reich still technically exists, but it was under Allied occupation because it didn't have legal political leadership to sign a formalized peace treaty. And I do want to note, and this is one of the fun technicalities of this time period, technically the final peace deal for Germany doesn't happen until 1991 when the two Germanys reunify, because before that point, neither side wants to sign a final deal because it involves essentially recognizing the other Germany as legitimate. So there's a bunch of weird interim treaties in the middle. But we also did all the Allies and the Soviet Union, we all made separate deals with their preferred Germanys ending the conflict. We signed ours, and President Truman signed a proclamation ending hostilities with Germany in 1951.
Who did he sign that with?
I would assume whoever the president of West Germany is in 1951.
Okay, so well, very obviously, World War II has not been continuing for decades.
Yes.
So they're not in a state of war.
Yeah, it's more of like the similar dumb technicality that Japan and Russia are still at war just because they can't agree on a peace deal, right? They're not actually fighting each other. But Abel claims that this is all because of this weird legal mishmash where technically the pre-Nazi government of Germany still exists, but they also can't find anyone to run it. And because of that, they can't sign a deal, which makes the lawsuit really complicated that he's trying to file. I don't know why they would tell him this, but what's more likely, I think, is that Abel has a stress-based psychotic break from losing his job. But he claims he has kind of a conversion moment, and on May 8th, 1985, he decides he's going to take on the task of building a new political government to run the German Reich and make it possible for Germany to become sovereign again and act on behalf of all the German people. He also claims that during this time, John Kornblum, who's one of the most famous American diplomats in Europe, and like orchestrates a bunch of famous moments in American diplomatic history. He's the guy who signs the 1991 reunification deal for the US, secretly visits him while this is going on and says, you need to lead, and this is what he claims, the United States of Europe to unify everything from the Atlantic to the Ural Mountains in your new job as Transportation Minister of the German Empire.
Okay, he doesn't even see himself as president. He just wants to be transportation minister. He has got some opinions about the subways.
He's supposed to run the whole United States of Europe, I guess, but also just be the transportation minister of the Imperial German government.
The first version of this whole Reichsbürger thing is a group of guys who are secretly pretending that they are the government. The second version of it is one guy who thinks he is the entire government's transportation minister, but he doesn't have any contact with these other guys.
As far as I can tell, he didn't hang out with them. I think he might have been too weird for them. He also claims that he gave the when he was asked at some point by the Allies for a copy of the German Constitution, and that they accepted a copy of the 1871 one, which is proof it's still in force. Astonishingly, Dimitri, I know this will shock you, John Kornblum, a very prominent public figure, has never commented on making this random subway worker the head of the United States of Europe or German transportation minister. You'd think he'd bring it up. He's pretty famous. He has chances.
You know what? It's been a while since I heard a right-wing movement about better public transit. That's not a popular talking point these days.
Yeah, it's a little unclear what's going on in this guy's head, but shockingly, the common theory is that he has a complete psychotic breakdown, manifesting in the belief that he is secretly the chancellor of a reunited Germany. That is the position of the German government, which declares him mentally incompetent in 1987, because he keeps suing them over and over again to have himself recognized as the legitimate executive authority of Germany.
So this guy's pretty wacky, but it seems like everyone is aware that he's pretty wacky. He's not committing any murders. He's just really passionate about subways. Dangerously, imperially passionate about subways. So, I mean, what effect does he have on this greater Reichsbürger movement?
From what I can tell, it's just that he is crazy enough to say these things in public, isn't actively a Nazi, and so can't be shut down by the anti-Nazi laws in Germany, and thus is able to popularize this notion that like some issue with German law makes the current government not legitimate. He himself dies in pretty substantial obscurity. A lot of the people who become interested in following him don't like his positive stance toward the Allies. He's pretty like pro-US from what I can tell, or he was before he died. And they don't like the more Nazi-flavored ones, his emphasis on the Second Reich. He wants to bring back the Imperial Constitution and to denazify the government, his words, by returning it to its pre-Weimar state, its pre-1918 state.
Okay, so there's a bunch of Germans out there who they don't want to go full Nazi, and congratulations on not wanting to go full Nazi. That's a pretty hard line for hopefully the vast majority of people on planet Earth. But they are interested in, let's see what this subway guy has to say about this legal loophole that he's discovered.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough that I think a lot of his popularity comes from the fact that he just won't shut up And so eventually he finds some people who are willing to listen to him. But not that many. The movement starts to splinter even during his lifetime, and then when he dies in 2014, it splinters further. It's now estimated that there are like 40-ish different Reichsbürger sects that are descended from his original one, but that broke away at some point. So it's very fragmented. So now we come to the part where we talk about, okay, what do these people actually believe, right? They're vaguely trace their ideas back to either Abel or Manfred Roeder, but, broadly, where is this notion of illegitimacy coming from? So, and this is according to Melanie Herman, who did some great German language work on this that I was able to wrangle a translation of. Their common reasons for saying the government is not legitimate is, first, Germany is governed by a basic law, and they say that's not a constitution because it's called a basic law, not a constitution. I can't stress enough that's not how that works. It just, basic laws or constitutions just have a higher priority in terms of like determining the compatibility of laws than regular flavor laws. Their second argument is that the Allies imposed the Constitution on Germany, and so it's not legitimate. It is true the Allies did tell the Germans to rewrite the Constitution, but the text of the German Constitution was drafted by members of German state governments elected post-1945. So it's drafted by Germans, notably different from Japan, where America drafts the whole Constitution. Here it is written by Germans. They are just told to do it by Americans. The next banana pants reason is there's no final peace treaty to end World War II, and therefore there is no recognition of a new German government. That, I guess, was true before 1991, but after 1991, the Treaty on the Final Settlement with Germany, also called the 2+4 Treaty, does do that. If that was true, it would no longer be true now. And the last one, and this made my brain hurt, was a 1973 Supreme Court case from West Germany that they claim accidentally invalidated the entire German government.
It's really a bad idea to leave a secret, make the government not exist anymore loophole in your legal code. I mean, really, real oversight.
I just want to stress this, people, anyone who's listening, that's not, law is not a magic thing where if you intone the right phrase, you can just make things fly because you oh, I found a phrase that says the thing out. That's not how it works. Oh my God.
Okay, so I'm very curious because as an American who is fascinated by weird legal loopholes, I am seeing a lot here in the reasoning that is very similar to something we have in America called the sovereign citizen movement. But the sovereign citizen movement, as far as I am aware, is not attempting to declare that they are the secret actual government. They're just trying to get out of paying child support because the flag has some tassels on it or some shit like that.
Well, these guys also really don't want to pay taxes, and we'll do the sovereign citizen movement at some point, but I do think there is some kind of overlap there. I have to talk about the Supreme Court case. I spent so long reading this.
Okay, please tell me about this Supreme Court case.
In 1973, the Chancellor of West Germany, Willy Brandt, signs a normalization treaty between West and East Germany, and the government of Bavaria, one of the states of West Germany, tries to sue to stop the treaty on the ground that it violates West Germany's basic law, its constitution, which says the reunification of Germany is one of the basic objectives of the state. The suit claims recognizing East Germany impedes reunification, so it's not constitutional. The court has this ruling where it talks about essentially the exact phrase is the German Reich continues to exist and possesses legal capacity, but is not itself capable of acting as an entire state for lack of organization, in particular for lack of institutionalized organs. So what it's saying is that a unified German government no longer exists, right? Because now you have two Germanys, so there's no singular German Reich. The Reichsbürgers seize on this, and they're like, aha! The pre-1945 government still exists because this Supreme Court case says so. They then do not read, and I cannot stress this enough, literally the next fucking paragraph, which starts with the establishment of the Federal Republic of Germany, not a new West German state was founded, but rather a part of Germany was reorganized. It literally just says, All that's being said here is we're not all of Germany. We're just one Germany. It's the next paragraph. It's not hard. Ugh.
Isaac, don't you know that the way laws work is that you read part of the law and then anything else that is in the law after the part that you care about is not important?
Oh my god, this is not... You don't just repeat the right phrase. No, I've dissolved the government. Ugh.
Okay, so what... They're very focused on all of this legal technicality, but what are they actually attempting to use these technicalities to do?
We'll get to that. I forgot two of the more insane ones.
Oh boy.
I'm sorry.
Oh boy.
I was so angry about that. I forgot. Okay. Article 23 of the old basic law limited the space of West Germany's government to what was then West Germany, right? It says we're not a government of that part of Germany. That's not our business. That gets repealed after unification. And the claim of some Reichsbürgers is that by doing this, the government accidentally repealed the whole constitution, and therefore the government no longer exists. That's not how that works. You can't accidentally repeal the Constitution, both because that's insane, and because Article 79 of the Constitution, read the rest of the assignment, explicitly bans repealing the whole Constitution in this way. And then here's my favorite, the most insane one, the claim that the German government is not a government, it's an LLC.
What?
The claim is members of the government and of bureaucracy, like the government bureaucracy, are listed in business directories. Right? If you look in like a business directory in Germany, you'll find phone numbers for various government ministries. And therefore, that the German government is not a government, it's an LLC, a limited liability corporation.
Oh man, that's a new one.
That they're just in there because when you do business, you have to call the government sometimes.
So this would have been back when I guess you had the yellow pages and the white pages for personal and business phone numbers. So
yes.
They're basically saying it was in the white pages, which is where businesses go.
Yes, that is what they are claiming because obviously you have this grand conspiracy to run Germany, but it was undone by the phone book because they had to be honest about which phone book it goes in.
Oh my god.
People are fucking idiots. Anyway.
So, okay, how much of this is people who are out to actually do something with this apparent knowledge that the government's not real and law's not real and I have a past that says I can do what I want from the imperial German government, versus how much of it is sincere belief in some kind of conspiracy theory? Do we have any information about that?
Genuinely hard to say. These people, I mean, they're insane, so no one wants to really pull them that aggressively. And B, like, there's a few different things going on here. There's a few different motivations. I found a really interesting interview in German from a criminal psychologist, Jan Gerrit Kiel, who talks about the Reichsbürgers in terms of a psychological framework called cognitive closure. And I'm going to read out the language. This is machine translated, so I did my best. There is a theory that people are looking for cognitive closure. They need closure. They want a world that they understand, that works. The fact is that through the internet age, we have created information opportunities for everyone that are greater than they ever were before. There is also no pre-selection by editors who organize something and present it to me, but I get original data everywhere. But I also come across fake news. It requires a lot from the individual to create a coherent worldview. So I get a feeling for the complexity of the world. Now the question is, do I have the resources to deal with this complexity by distinguishing between changeable and unchangeable worlds? If I can't do that, I will have problems, and this can be a frightening experience for many. Reichsbürger ideologies are very suitable for this kind of analysis because they link everything to everything else. It goes into the esoteric. It goes into the anti-Semitic. It is not open, but coded by high finance or the elites. All of these link together, and then I have this sublime feeling or empowering feeling that those out there on the streets are all blinded, but I've looked into the clockwork and got it.
Interesting. So, yeah, this is an interesting look at the psychology of the way this kind of movement gets started and sustains itself. And it talks a bit about something that I think has been a subject of discussion quite a bit, which is the health nut to conspiracy theory pipeline. It doesn't seem the same on the surface that you would start with something like an anti-vaxxer and end up with someone who believes the government's not real. But the same psychological effect kind of is a through line there.
Yeah, I think there's a good amount of that. And we're actually going to look at some examples of it in a bit. This kind of shared need to like make sense of a complex world and to have easy answers to complicated problems. As is hinted in that bit, there's also a big strain of anti-Semitism in a lot of this. You see a lot of talk about the coastal elites behind the conspiracy of the conspiracy of the German government, or the globalists, or George Soros, or the Rothschilds. Or if you really just want to be on the nose without technically breaking Germany's laws around anti-Semitism, just say, of course, the Zionists are behind it. But there is a long strain of anti-Semitic conspiracy around all of this, arguing, of course, that the Jews are secretly controlling the German government for their own ends. You got to be pretty careful about this in Germany because German law is very strict about open anti-Semitism or open pro-Nazi sentiment, which I guess raises question around free speech, but like also I ain't going to get precious about that in this context. And definitely the Reichsbürgers have a bit of that. And then you also just have some people who don't want to pay taxes, or who are in it to just con the shit out of stupid people, or who are genuinely crazy. I think there's a little bit of all of those magic flavors sprinkled in together.
Mm-hmm. And that is always a problem with conspiracy theories, is that when you are building your worldview on the idea that a mysterious group of people has secret control of the government, ooh, who are you going to run into who has some strong opinions about who those secret group of people might be?
You pretty much always end up there in my experience. And of course, the internet drives all of this into high gear starting in the 2010s. Thanks to its ability to spew out crazy bullshit at high volume to even the most vulnerable people. We all have that crazy relative on Facebook. We know how this works by now. I don't think we need to go into it that much. What I want to do now, Demetria, with the few minutes we have left, is share some examples of some crazy-ass Reichsbürger sects that exist today.
Yes. Okay. So we've talked so much about these crazy motherfuckers, but apart from the guy who committed murder, even under Imperial German law or Nazi law, I mean, the Nazis killed a lot of people, but they still had laws against randomly murdering people on the street. So I'm hearing a lot of people talking about how the government is not making laws that apply to them, and they're actually following the laws of a different government. But what laws are they actually claiming don't apply to them that they're attempting to break?
Well, I suspect a lot of these people are just fucking insane, and a few of them are just in it for the grift. And that brings us to Peter Fitzik, who is the first person I want to introduce. Born August 12th, 1965. Before he became a Reichsbürger, he was a professional karate instructor and a cook who ran an esoteric magic shop in his spare time. And I want to send you... First, Dimitri, I want you to picture who that person looks like. Just the person with that biography.
You know what? I can smell him.
And now I want you to look in Discord. I've sent you a picture.
Oh, man.
Is that not exactly what you were picturing?
I'm getting a real strong whiff through the screen.
Yeah, for those listening at home, which I guess is all but Demetria, this man is not wearing a shirt. You also can't see his rat tail in that image, which is really tragic. So I'm not sure how he got involved in the Reichsbürgers, but somehow he ended up in Wittenberg, where he bought an old hospital that he redecorated as a castle to be his home base, where he claims that he is the new king of Germany. He wants to restore Germany's 1937 borders. He wants to do this peacefully, even though by my count it would require going to war with Poland and the Czech Republic. But also, he's just crazy. In 2012, he crowned himself King Peter I of Germany in a ceremony that he did record and put on YouTube. I am sorry to tell you it has since been taken down, but I did find some stills. You want to see those stills?
I would love to. Speaking of coronation ceremonies, after our last episode, I got a high bar.
Here are the two stills I could find of his crowning. It looks like a high school theater production.
Oh, it's spectacular.
A bad one, too. I'm pretty sure that crown came from like a dollar store.
That fake mink coat is really pulling the look together.
It's really a vibe. So he did this after trying to run for the Reichstag. It didn't go well for him, astonishingly. So instead, he crowns himself king of Germany, and then he's King Peter the First now, I should say. He also opens a Royal Reichsbank and a new German health fund for health insurance, for which he is sent to prison in 2017 on fraud. And that's also when I believe the YouTube account gets suspended. Last I'd heard about King Peter the First / Peter Fitzik, he's currently in prison again. He's serving an 8-month prison sentence because he assaulted a security guard while at the DMV to renew his driver's license because they wouldn't let him in without a mask. His defense, would you like to guess what his defense was?
I could not in a million years guess what his defense was.
He is a monarch, he's a head of state, he's immune to prosecution.
Okay, so this guy has decided to circumvent all of this whole Reichsbürger, all the laws don't apply because of there's some other government's laws that I'm following. He is going for the state, that's me. He's going full French monarch here.
Yes. He estimates currently he has about 5,000 active followers, which seems generous, but technically he does personally own 200 acres of kingdom, thanks to conning his followers, so maybe it's possible.
Wow, okay, so he is getting some money out of this, so he does have a financial incentive to keep this going. Although, the whole health insurance scam seems like it was probably a big moneymaker for him.
I imagine you do pretty well at it. I'd never tried to con anyone with fake national health insurance, and for the record, this podcast doesn't endorse that, but it seems like you could make a lot of money. Speaking of making a lot of money, let's talk about Peter Fruwald, our next subject. So he's born in 1960, I think. I had a hard time finding much on him. I didn't find anything until 2010 when he became an active Reichsbürger, advocating for a state self-government in Germany. And in 2012, he proclaims a new Republic of Free Germany using the Weimar Constitution as its base and has his supporters elect him president. He then gets dismissed by his own government as Reichspresident because of the bad press he attracts to the government because he is the most obvious fucking grifter on the planet.
You know what? I gotta say I am cheering for this guy. I think, was he the only one who did choose Weimar Germany as the true government?
He does, yeah. He's Team Weimar. So yeah, could be worse.
As things that the Weimar Republic has done to lose money, still not even top 20.
That is true. So basically, from what I can tell, this is all an excuse to set up seminars where he can charge upwards of 100 euros for tickets to explain that Germany is still at war because there's no formal peace treaty, even though, by the loosest definition, there was one in 1991. Therefore, the basic law is not real, and therefore, with the right paperwork, including a card that you can get from his government saying you're a citizen of the Republic of Free Germany for, of course, a minor fee, you can just get out of any law, like paying your taxes. He also teaches life hacks for dealing with government employees, like just yell at them a lot until they leave you alone, which, to be fair, will work. They will eventually. The bureaucrats will go home. They'll just come back with cops at a later date, so it'll work for a time.
I gotta say, I admire this guy's flagrant grift. I want to hear what he has to say about the subway system.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys are just obvious grifters.
This is my question, though. Is he actually committing a crime under actual real German law by charging people for what I assume are fake IDs?
I assume that we have a law against counterfeiting government documents. Yeah. I assume Germany does too.
Has he actually been arrested or prosecuted for any of this, or are they just letting him do his thing?
I couldn't find, but I again don't speak German. I had to rely a lot on translated sources or things I could run through Google Translate. So no, I don't know. Actually, I'd be curious if any of our German speaking listeners can figure out whether Peter Fruwald has done any time.
Yeah, fascinating. I don't know if he's technically even a criminal.
I would assume he's been at least hit for fraud a couple times, but I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of people to prosecute in the world. They might have just not gotten to him yet. But a lot of these people are like that. Like, one of the things Melanie Herman points out in her book on the Reichsbürgers is that it is a great grift because you can just feel very important by declaring yourself the king or president or whatever of your own German government. And you can, like, basically give people positions in exchange for money. Like, Demetria, do you want to be my transportation minister? all you have to do is pay a fee into the coffers of the government, and you can go around saying you're the transportation minister of Germany. It's a pretty
Excellent.
solid grift.
After we invade Poland, I have some great ideas for their subway system.
And this is also why these movements keep splintering, because you run out of government positions eventually, even if you get creative. But that's okay. You make a new government, and you have a whole new cabinet to fill.
Fascinating. So it's kind of a grift MLM scheme.
I would say this is the MLM approach to government. Okay, I have two more Reichsbürgers I want to get to, but they're a little bit shorter. This one is, depressing, but also kind of funny. Horst Mahler, who is one of the weirdest ones, because he was originally a hardcore leftist. He's born in 1936, and he's a member of the Baader-Meinhof gang. Probable future episode subject, the German Red Army faction, just doing some left-wing terrorism across Europe. He does 10 years in prison for teaching, I think, members of the Palestinian Liberation Organization how to make bombs. So, like, a hardcore leftist who then, after he's released from prison, converts to the Nazi Party in the 90s and becomes like an overt anti-Semite, an extreme nationalist, founds a bunch of Holocaust denial groups. But that's okay because he's also he's the living incarnation of the Sideshow Bob meme where he just keeps stepping on the rakes over and over again. But it's violating Germany's anti-hate speech laws.
Oh my God. Well, obviously you probably don't want to quote anything he's actually said on the podcast.
I mean, it's all like doing Hitler salutes at Jews or claiming Israel did 9/11, but he keeps doing this on camera, or where people can like watch him do it and like testify, yes, Mr. Policeman, that guy over there. So he's been on and off in jail for like 20 years. And most recently, he tried to flee to Hungary in 2017 to get asylum and posted his request via YouTube video, which is then not accepted because I guess that's not a valid format, and then was put in prison again. He did get out in 2020, and I haven't found anything about him since, so I think he may have finally run out of rakes. But, I mean, I don't know what the fuck's going on in that guy's head.
Okay, so last guy seemed like maybe he was skirting what was actually a crime, and the other guy is just filming himself so that the actual German government can see all of the crimes he is just constantly
conveniently
committing.
documenting all of his hate speech. Our last guy, and this kind of gets at the granola to alt-right pipeline thing you were talking about, is Joe Conrad, or Johannes Conrad, born in 1958. And he's in like a weird mixture of this movement. He's a high school dropout, then a musician, then a landscape photographer, but then discovers in the 90s he can make a lot of money writing nonsense conspiracy books, and then sets up his own website called Bewusst.tv in 2010 that becomes this clearinghouse for both conspiracy stuff and like new age shamanism hoo-ha. So like I went to an archive.org version of the website, and like half of it is shilling weird supplements or talking about like aligning your chakras or making sure that Jupiter is in whatever house or stuff like that.
I am just picturing the poorly spaced HTML tables on that.
I mean, I should have thought
it was a different age of the internet.
I should have thought to include the link, but it looks exactly like you'd think. And then the other half is like full on QAnon, Pizzagate, like they, and we all know who they is, and he's pretty clear about who they are too. It's the Jews. Are eating the blood of children to stay young. He openly promotes, by the way, both Pizzagate and QAnon. He's also friends with King Peter I and was at his coronation.
Wait a second. So he believes in a different government, not Peter I, but he also pals around with Peter I?
I think he's like he's a non-denominational Reichsbürger, from what I can tell. He just doesn't like the current government.
All right. So I don't know which government laws actually apply to me. I just know that it's not this one.
Yes. So that's my broad introduction to the Reichsbürgers. And they're very funny. I want to be clear. But they are like a genuine problem. Both they have been for a while and they've become more of one lately. They're obviously really disruptive to local government. They're just like, one of the things these guys do is just bombard government functionaries with letters saying like, I don't have to pay that speeding ticket. You can't charge me taxes. They just waste a shitload of time at minimum, and they can get very belligerent or threatening to unlawful German authorities, as they call them. They also do a lot of damage to their families. A lot of them are being bilked by grifters and losing their family's money. Obviously, eventually the government will come and get those fucking taxes from you one way or another. And when they do, it's not going to be great for your family. I found one really depressing story about from Melanie Herman's book, interviewing a guy who, as a teenager, his stepfather had been a Reichsbürger. And he talks about, like, I needed a father figure. I had no father. I looked up to this guy because he seemed smart. And then I watched him just spiral and become increasingly, like, obsessed with trying to win his case against the German government, becoming just awful and abusive. And I guess now he's on the run from the cops in South Africa. So, like, these guys are just not great for the people around them or themselves.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about that with QAnon in the United States too, of people who are previously pretty stable and happy members of society end up spiraling. But the problem is it is very hard to legislate out of you cannot start believing in weird shit and spiraling and giving all your money to grifters. You can try to go after the grifters to the extent that they are breaking the law, but there isn't really a good way to legislate your way out of the problem of people falling prey to conspiracy theories. At least not one that I'm aware of has been implemented successfully.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to do, and a lot of these guys can afford good lawyers because they're so good at grifting. I do also want to note the Reichsbürger movement can get extremely violent. One example is, I'm going to butcher this name, Adrian Ursache, who's born in 1974, had actually been Mr. Germany. Like, he was a successful bodybuilder and won Mr. Germany in 1998. But then after that point, ends up falling in with the Reichsbürgers. His property gets seized in 2014 because he doesn't pay taxes. And he then claims that he's founded his own German government called and that any attempt to seize his property by the tax authorities is a declaration of war. So he has a 2-year standoff with the government before the cops try to storm his place. Germany does allow for legal gun ownership. It's way more restricted than the US, but it is doable. And he did get a gun somehow and shoots a cop. Non-fatally, but only because the bullet deflected off of the helmet. He's charged with attempted murder. He claims the trial is not legitimate because the court isn't real, because the West German government isn't real. He is convicted after being kicked out of his own trial for disrupting it repeatedly. So these guys are pretty messed up. And then did you hear about the whole coup thing in December last year? Not the other coup.
Yeah, there were some other coups around the world that I was a little more concerned about.
So about a year ago, the German police busted a huge coup plot tied to something called the Patriotic Union, which is a Reichsbürger group that was trying to overthrow the German government and reimpose the monarchy. They were led by a right-wing monarchist, a descendant of a German aristocratic family named Heinrich Prince Reuss. They astonishingly are thought to maybe have had ties to the Russian government, a very fair and stable actor in world politics. And they had recruited a couple of cops and ex-military types. They did have like weapons and depots and stuff. But then the German federal police got onto them, and now they're all either on their way to prison or already there. But that does show, like, these people are dangerous. They're crazy Looney Tunes, and a lot of them are making money just selling fake driver's licenses to people or whatever. But they're also, like, super crazy and they can get very violent.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, just believing crazy shit is not necessarily against the law, but it does seem like this movement is actively encouraging people to break the law.
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly, all of them do. Particularly the more extremist ones can really get into the territory of like dangerous laws. You're not going to collapse Germany by not paying your taxes. So that's a thing that can be dealt with in its own time. But when we're talking about like stockpiling weapons, then things get pretty dangerous. So that's my introduction to the Reichsbürger movement. I have a couple of final kind of thoughts, conversation pieces if we'd like to talk about them.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Well, I mean, one of the weird things about this movement researching it was, the role of the internet, right? And kind of this ongoing conversation that we've had before on this podcast about the role of internet misinformation and how do you regulate that, but also like the permeability of crazy right-wing conspiracy across national lines. Like you have Reichsbürger people promoting QAnon and Pizzagate. A lot of them are really into Donald Trump. And you see that in other right-wing movements in other parts of the world too.
I have actually heard this can be a problem in Europe sometimes, as some of these conspiracy theorist movements will claim that they have First Amendment rights without understanding that they are not Americans. They do not have that right. They may have other rights to free speech in their own constitutions.
Yeah, I appreciate the respect put on the US, but guys, we don't actually run the entire planet. We just act like it. It's for me what it just makes me think is like this right-wing kind of fringe, despite the nationalism of it, is still operating across national lines, which also, drives home the importance of fighting this sort of ideology across national lines too. Like, I think it'll not shock any of our listeners to know that we're not fans of like right wing ultranationalism, and I don't think that's a uniquely American problem or a uniquely German problem or anywhere. It's a worldwide problem, which is why we have to build bonds of solidarity across national borders because they're doing it, so we need to too.
I am curious because there's been a lot of interesting talk from the left about de-radicalizing people and fighting this kind of radicalization by removing some of the legitimate complaints that people do have about the way their lives are going and the way society's going, the housing crisis, something that comes up quite a bit. Young men in particular who don't feel like they have a very good future can go down some weird rabbit holes if it seems like Peter, the King of Germany, has a better idea of how they should be living their lives. What are your thoughts on that? Because yeah, like I said, I'm not really. I've heard a lot of talk about attempting to legislate. And Germany actually has really been among the European countries that have really been leading the charge in legislating speech on the internet in the way that I didn't get into it a ton in the Section 230 talk because that was more about an American law. But some of the European laws about speech on the internet, I actually really do support. I think they're great laws. But I don't think that those alone are going to fix the problem. So what are your thoughts on those? I just dumped like 20 questions on you. Just go.
I don't think everyone joining the Reichsbürger movement is doing so because they feel economic anxiety, right? That's definitely a driver. It's a driver for any extremist ideology on the left or on the right, right? But it's not the only thing in either of those cases. That anxiety gets filtered through a pre-existing worldview, and that's kind of the activator. And I think making people's lives better fundamentally is just a good thing. This is one of the reasons why things like making housing cheaper, more affordable, or opening up opportunities for people who lose their jobs to retrain, that's just good policy for a bunch of reasons, including this. But I also feel like addressing the mindset issue is a big one. Maybe this is where, as a teacher, the plug for the value of education in terms of learning how to grapple with complexity, I really think that's an incredibly crucial skill. It's not one, frankly, that a lot of secondary schools teach well, and even a lot of college programs don't teach it very well. But it's why I believe very firmly in the importance of the liberal arts for everyone, not just people who are going to end up doing white collar jobs or people in academia. Some exposure to what does it look like to break down an argument and think critically about it and just grapple with the fact that there is complexity in the world, but it is possible to use your brain to work through that in a way that is not just, well, this crazy man on the internet gave me some answers that are simple and I like simple. I think there's a real educational component in terms of how we train people to grapple with complexity and just get them to understand the world is complicated and it kind of sucks sometimes. But the better response is to find ways to try and make it better and not just look for the easy out.
I think that's a good sentiment. We've had some interesting personal talks about the psychology of how, again, going back to the disaffected young men issue of how one presents a healthier and better life path than going down the path of I'm not happy with my life. Something must be keeping me down. Perhaps what is keeping me down is them. Perhaps I don't actually have to be kept down if I'm not a member of the government that is being puppeted by them. Yeah, what are your sort of your thoughts on that? Because I think you've had to do a fair amount of anti-Andrew Tate de-radicalization in the last few years with your students. I don't know exactly what flavor some of these Reichsbürger guys are getting their particular weirdness from, but I did notice there were a lot of guys who were karate instructors, bodybuilders, guys who had been in a very hyper masculine environment where some weird shit does tend to float around.
Yeah, I mean, I think a willingness to I think the biggest thing for me that I've noticed having those conversations is you really have to get to people when they're young. And you have to have conversations with young boys, especially about like, what does it mean to treat people who are not men as your equals, right? What does that look like? How do you model that? How do men model that for young boys? Like, I think that's really hard to talk someone into, because once you get into that mindset, it's really hard to get out of it. I think you have to be intentional about modeling that and showing it to people, and just showing like, hey, it's perfectly possible to live a really happy and fulfilling and good life in this way. And like, the other option is not going to, like, that's not going to lead you anywhere positive. It's going to lead you down this road of being very lonely. It's a hard conversation to have. I mean, I think it's a really challenging, but I think it needs to happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting. We talked about kind of a broad range of weird guys in this episode. I don't think there were any female names whole episode. Not one woman seems to be prominent.
Not that I could find. I mean, there probably are a few. Again, I'm not an expert, but wouldn't surprise me.
Which does not mean that women do not fall prey to conspiracy theories.
There are certainly women in the extreme right. I mean, Marine Le Pen always comes to mind. I forget her name, but the new prime minister of Italy comes to mind. The message they send in my understanding, and I have a colleague who knows more about this, but it's very different. It's more focused on this idea of like gender normativity and quote unquote the traditional family. So certainly like you don't see them as prominently in the Reichsbürger movement, but I know that like, especially in the realm of the defense of traditional German womanhood, there are a lot of right-wing German women. Just like the conversations they're having are different because they are shaped by that kind of gender essentialism. And I think now that we've gone 75 minutes on this subject and are wending into more the theories of right-wing politics, this is probably a great place for us to wrap up. If people want to help us found our own German government, because now that's just apparently the hot new thing to do, where can they find us?
They can find us at facingbackward.com.
We're also on both Tumblr at tumblr.com /blog/facingbackwards and Blue Sky. We are Facing Backwards. You can also find us at Patreon if you want to support my delving into the insane world of right-wing German politics at patreon.com /facingbackward.
And special shout to our patrons who pledged at our shout-out tier. They are Jan Leonard, Stephen Elkins, Martin Oliveira, Clark Canning, Ian Kellett, Matt Haynes, Jackie Frostocker, Monkey Sack, Alayla McCullough, Kieran Murphy, Peter Wales, Robert Prine, William, Arno, Jonas Brandis, Nicholas Kroll, Jerry Spinrad, Jared Stevens, Jeffrey Dwork, Stefan Hrushka, Joshua Kane, Robbie and Kat, Jacob Key, Aaron Finkbeiner, an anonymous Anna's Hummingbird, Mark Sy, Gil, Leslie Ikuda, Trash Taste Enjoyer, Harrison Rees, Robbie Martin McAvoy, Inoue Enryo's Ghostbusters, NihongoKaizen.com, Shimao Toshio's History of Japonesia podcast, A House is a Perfectly Cromulent Mascot, The Fish I Catch Are Rhodes Scholars compared to Samuel Alito, Schmuck, and Everything Changed When the Fire Nation Attacked, a nation which, by the way, I don't believe is real. I am a sovereign citizen of the Fire Nation.
I don't recognize your Fire Lord Ozai. I only recognize whoever the last one was, who only appears in that one episode and whose name I forget. It's not a legitimate government. Bring back the previous fire thing, whatever.
I'm making Uncle Iroh the actual governor of the Fire Nation.
You know what? I think we can all agree on that. Long live Uncle Iroh. Until next time, folks.
I radicalized you.